Introduction. The 80-20 rule, also known as the Pareto Principle, is the idea that a small portion of causes or inputs often leads to a large portion of results or outputs. In many situations, this means that a minority of efforts, resources, or activities are responsible for the majority of outcomes. For example, in business, it's common to find that a relatively small number of customers generate the majority of revenue. This principle is used to prioritize, focus, and optimize efforts by identifying the most impactful factors in a given situation. Brief history of the 80-20 rule. The origin of the principle traces back to Pareto's studies in 1896, during which he made a striking empirical observation about the distribution of land ownership in Italy. He found that approximately 80% of the land was owned by 20% of the population. This pattern, which he initially noticed in his home country, appeared to replicate itself with a surprising degree of consistency across different nations and time periods. As Pareto expanded his research, analyzing income and wealth data across various European countries, he began to see a recurring trend. A relatively small portion of the population controlled the majority of wealth, and this imbalance appeared to follow a predictable mathematical relationship. What Pareto identified was not just a random inequality, but a consistent statistical regularity that he expressed using a mathematical formula. He noticed that the distribution of wealth followed a power law pattern, a specific type of distribution that is heavily skewed toward one end. This realization laid the groundwork for what later became known as the Pareto distribution, a model still used in economics and other fields to describe phenomena where a small number of causes or agents are responsible for a large portion of the effects. While Pareto's initial focus was on economic disparities, the broader implications of his findings were not fully explored until much later. It wasn't until the mid-20th century that management consultant Joseph M. Uron reinterpreted and popularized Pareto's work in the context of quality control and business management. Uron coined the term the Pareto Principle, summarizing the pattern as the idea that 80% of consequences often stem from 20% of causes. This heuristic has since been applied across a wide variety of disciplines, from software engineering and inventory management to healthcare and personal productivity. Vilfredo Pareto's original contribution, however, was rooted in a methodical and data-driven analysis of wealth distribution. His work challenged conventional assumptions about equality and highlighted the structural nature of economic imbalance. Rather than viewing inequality as a moral or social aberration, Pareto treated it as a natural and recurring phenomenon within the fabric of society, governed by underlying statistical laws. Though his ideas were initially controversial and met with mixed reactions, especially due to their perceived implications for social reform, Pareto's intellectual legacy has endured. His work laid a foundation for both quantitative economics and a broader field of sociological inquiry into how power and resources are distributed within societies. His influence continues to be felt in economic modeling, systems theory, and even in algorithm design, illustrating the lasting relevance of a principle born from 19th century observations about wealth in Europe. Why the 80-20 rule matters in business and personal life. In business, the 80-20 rule can be a powerful tool for decision-making and resource allocation. Entrepreneurs and managers often discover that a small fraction of their products or services generate the majority of their revenue. This insight encourages companies to focus on their most profitable offerings rather than spreading resources thin across underperforming areas. Likewise, when examining customer bases, it's common to find that a minority of clients account for the majority of profits. Recognizing this pattern allows businesses to enhance customer relationships where it matters most, personalize services, and foster loyalty in their most valuable clientele. Marketing strategies can also benefit from the Pareto Principle. A few channels or campaigns typically drive most of the traffic or conversions. By identifying which efforts deliver the greatest return on investment, companies can refine their messaging, cut unnecessary costs, and amplify successful tactics. The same logic applies to operations and workforce productivity. Within any team or organization, a subset of employees or practices often generates the bulk of positive outcomes. Leaders who recognize this can better support high-performing individuals and replicate effective systems, leading to improved performance across the board. In personal development, people frequently find that a few habits, when consistently applied, produce the greatest improvements in physical health, mental clarity, or emotional resilience. For example, regular exercise, sufficient sleep, and a balanced diet may constitute a small percentage of daily activities, yet they significantly impact overall well-being. By focusing on these high-leverage habits, individuals can create a strong foundation for long-term health and productivity. Time management is another area where the Pareto Principle offers clarity. Many people are busy but not necessarily effective, often spending hours on tasks that produce minimal results. Applying the 80-20 lens can help identify which activities contribute most meaningfully toward personal or professional goals. This encourages a shift from a culture of busyness to one of intentionality. Instead of attempting to do everything, individuals can prioritize the tasks that align with their core objectives, reducing stress and enhancing focus. Even relationships can be viewed through the 80-20 framework. A small number of relationships often contribute the most to a person's happiness, growth, and sense of belonging. By nurturing these key connections, rather than trying to maintain dozens of superficial interactions, people can experience deeper, more meaningful relationships. The same applies to conflict and stress. Often, a few recurring issues or misunderstandings create the majority of tension. Identifying and addressing these root causes can lead to a more harmonious personal life. The 80-20 rule is not about doing less for the sake of minimalism, but about doing more of what works. It fosters strategic thinking, sharper focus, and purposeful action. When integrated into daily decision-making, it empowers individuals and organizations to operate with greater effectiveness and clarity, transforming how time, energy, and resources are used. Whether applied to scaling a business or achieving personal balance, the Pareto Principle remains a timeless guide to maximizing impact in a world full of competing demands. Chapter 1. The 80-20 Rule Demystified. As we have already established, the 80-20 distribution, also known as the Pareto Principle, is a concept rooted in economics and statistics that illustrates an imbalance often observed in various aspects of life, business, and natural phenomena. The basic idea is that roughly 80% of consequences come from 20% of causes. This principle was first identified by Italian economist Vilfredo Pareto in the late 19th century. He noticed that approximately 80% of the land in Italy was owned by 20% of the population. Since then, the principle has been found to apply across a wide range of domains. The 80-20 distribution suggests a power law relationship where a small proportion of inputs or efforts often leads to the majority of outputs or results. It is not a strict mathematical law, but rather a heuristic or rule of thumb that captures the essence of asymmetrical relationships. For instance, in business, it's commonly observed that a small percentage of customers are responsible for the majority of sales, or that a minority of products account for the majority of profits. Similarly, in software development, a few lines of code may cause most of the bugs, or a handful of tasks might produce the bulk of productivity. What makes the 80-20 principle particularly powerful is its applicability in identifying leverage points. By recognizing the small set of factors that yield the greatest results, individuals and organizations can optimize their efforts for maximum efficiency. In time management, this might mean focusing on the most productive activities and minimizing time spent on low-value tasks. In marketing, it could involve prioritizing the customer segments that generate the most revenue. This distribution also applies in less obvious areas. In healthcare, a small percentage of patients may consume the majority of resources. In education, a few key concepts might underpin a large portion of the curriculum. Even in social networks, a minority of users often generate the most content or influence the most people. It's important to note that the numbers 80 and 20 are not fixed and can vary depending on the context. Sometimes, the ratio might be 70/30ths, 90/10ths, or even more extreme. The core idea remains the same. There's often a significant imbalance between inputs and outputs, causes and effects. Understanding and applying the 80-20th distribution does not mean neglecting the majority of elements, but rather being strategic about where to focus energy and resources. It's a way to prioritize and make more informed decisions, especially in environments characterized by complexity and limited resources. This principle challenges the assumption that effort and result are evenly distributed. Most people intuitively expect a one-to-one correspondence between input and output. More effort equals more results. However, the 80-20 distribution highlights that such a relationship is rare. Instead, a small number of variables, actions, or participants often have a disproportionately large impact on outcomes. This disproportion is frequently evident in economic contexts. Wealth distribution, for example, typically exhibits an extreme form of the 80-20 pattern, where a small fraction of individuals or corporations hold a large portion of the total wealth. This is not just a modern issue, but a structural pattern that recurs across different societies and historical periods. Economists and sociologists often refer to such phenomena as examples of Pareto efficiency or Pareto optimality, where improving one variable without making another worse becomes increasingly difficult as the most effective variables are optimized. In business strategy, companies use the 80-20 insight to identify their most profitable products, customers, or marketing channels. Rather than spreading resources evenly across all areas, they focus on what drives the majority of value. For example, a retailer might discover that a small selection of inventory accounts for the bulk of sales. Similarly, a service provider might find that a few high-value clients are responsible for most of their revenue. This understanding enables targeted investments in those areas that yield the highest returns. In human productivity and personal effectiveness, the 80-20 rule has gained traction as a tool for time management and life design. People often realize that only a few of their daily tasks lead to meaningful results, while the rest contribute little to progress. By identifying and emphasizing those high-impact activities, whether it's strategic planning, relationship building, or creative work, individuals can significantly improve their output without a corresponding increase in effort or time spent. The principle also shows up in innovation and technology. In software engineering, it's common to find that a few critical bugs or design flaws cause the majority of problems. Similarly, a handful of features in an app might be responsible for the majority of user engagement. Product teams use this insight to prioritize development efforts and streamline user experiences. In the startup world, early-stage companies often survive and thrive by focusing on their 20%, those key differentiators that attract customers and create value quickly. The 80-20 pattern has implications in ecology and environmental science as well. A small number of species may play a crucial role in maintaining the balance of an ecosystem. The loss of these keystone species can trigger a cascade of negative effects, while other, less critical species have minimal impact on the overall system. Understanding this imbalance is essential for conservation efforts and sustainable environmental management. Even in learning and skill acquisition, the distribution applies. When mastering a new subject or language, a small percentage of foundational concepts or vocabulary enables comprehension of the majority of content. Educational systems that identify and prioritize these essential elements can dramatically improve teaching effectiveness and learning outcomes. It's important to emphasize that while the 80-20 distribution is incredibly useful, it can also be misapplied or oversimplified. It is not a justification for ignoring the less impactful 80% altogether, especially in situations where completeness, accuracy, or fairness is critical. In areas like healthcare, education, or public policy, attention to the long tail of needs and contributions is still essential. However, the principle serves as a powerful lens through which to view priorities, strategies, and decision-making. Some real-world examples of the 80-20 rule in wealth, productivity, and business. This principle has found broad applications in many real-world contexts, particularly in areas like wealth distribution, productivity, and business revenue. Though the exact ratio isn't always precisely the 80-20 rule, the general pattern, where a small number of inputs or actors are responsible for a large proportion of the outcomes, recurs strikingly across diverse domains. In terms of wealth distribution, the 80-20 principle is perhaps most famously illustrated. In many countries, especially capitalist economies, a small percentage of the population controls a disproportionately large share of the wealth. For example, it is commonly observed that the top 20% of individuals in terms of income or net worth may control as much as 80% or more of the nation's total wealth. This concentration becomes even more extreme at the global level. According to reports from organizations like Oxfam and Credit Suisse, the top 1% of global earners own nearly half of the world's wealth. This pattern reflects deep structural imbalances, and though the actual figures may fluctuate, the tendency toward concentration is consistent with the Pareto distribution. In the workplace, productivity often reflects the 80-20 rule in that a relatively small group of employees can be responsible for the majority of valuable output. This is frequently observed in creative and knowledge-based industries, where the impact of individuals can vary drastically. For instance, in software development, it's not uncommon for a small percentage of developers to produce the majority of useful code or solve the most critical problems. Similarly, in academic publishing, a small portion of researchers produce the bulk of influential papers and receive the highest number of citations. This phenomenon is not necessarily due to laziness or incompetence among the rest, but rather the complex interplay of skill, opportunity, and leverage that allows some contributors to have outsized effects. In business revenue, the Pareto Principle often governs customer bases and product sales. A significant portion of a company's revenue tends to come from a small fraction of its customers or products. For example, a retail company might find that 20% of its products account for 80% of sales, or that a small cohort of loyal customers drives the bulk of its revenue. This is especially evident in subscription-based services and luxury brands, where a core group of repeat or high-spending customers supports a large portion of the business's income. Online platforms and marketplaces also experience this effect. A minority of sellers on platforms like Etsy or Amazon often generate the majority of total sales. Similarly, for content platforms like YouTube or Spotify, a small percentage of creators or songs accumulate the vast majority of views and streams. These patterns are not mere coincidences. They emerge from a variety of mechanisms such as network effects, compounding advantages, and feedback loops. They also serve as powerful guides for strategy and prioritization. Recognizing that not all efforts yield equal results can help individuals and organizations focus on high-leverage activities, whether that means nurturing top clients, investing in high-performing employees, or optimizing best-selling products. Though the Pareto Principle doesn't apply universally or exactly in every scenario, its relevance across so many sectors speaks to its utility as a conceptual tool. By understanding and identifying these imbalanced patterns, decision-makers can better allocate resources, streamline processes, and ultimately achieve more impactful outcomes. In digital platforms and technology, the 80-20 rule has become even more pronounced due to the scalability and reach of the Internet. Consider web traffic. A small percentage of websites account for the vast majority of Internet traffic. Sites like Google, YouTube, Facebook, and a handful of others dominate user engagement, while millions of smaller sites receive minimal visits. The same pattern is evident in app usage. On most smartphones, users spend the majority of their time on just a few apps, even if they have dozens installed. This concentration of attention and usage creates strong feedback loops. Popular platforms attract more users, which in turn makes them more valuable, leading to even greater use. In education, the Pareto Principle appears when analyzing student performance and teaching efficacy. Teachers may notice that a small group of students tends to participate most actively in class, often driving the majority of discussion and engagement. Conversely, educators often find that a minority of students require a disproportionate amount of support, whether due to behavioral challenges, learning difficulties, or personal circumstances. Likewise, in university settings, a fraction of academic programs or departments may attract most of the funding, applications, and research grants, reflecting the competitive and unequal nature of academic prestige and influence. Healthcare systems also show Pareto-like distributions. A small proportion of patients often accounts for the bulk of healthcare spending. These are typically individuals with chronic conditions, frequent hospital visits, or complex medical needs. Health insurers and government programs like Medicare in the United States often see this pattern, A relatively small group of patients drives the majority of claims and expenditures. Similarly, in hospital operations, a limited number of high-cost procedures and specialist services often contribute the most to revenue, while also consuming the most resources. In the field of criminal justice and policing, studies have demonstrated that a small number of offenders are responsible for a large proportion of crimes. This has informed strategies like focused deterrence or hotspot policing, where law enforcement concentrates resources on high-risk individuals or locations that are known to generate the most criminal activity. Similarly, a small number of neighborhoods or even specific blocks within a city may account for most calls for service, arrests, or violent incidents. In ecology and environmental science, the 80-20 rule surfaces in resource distribution and species dominance. In many ecosystems, a few species dominate in terms of population or biomass, while the vast majority are less prevalent. This is observed in tropical rainforests, where a small percentage of tree species make up most of the canopy, or in oceans, where a handful of fish species account for the majority of commercial catches. Likewise, environmental degradation often follows this pattern. A small number of industrial sectors or regions may be responsible for the bulk of pollution or carbon emissions, which informs targeted policy interventions. Even in personal habits and lifestyle, the 80-20 rule proves useful. For example, individuals might find that a small number of habits contribute the most to their health and well-being. Things like consistent sleep, regular exercise, or balanced meals. Similarly, in time management, a few key activities tend to generate the most progress toward long-term goals, while the rest may have minimal impact or even detract from success. Productivity experts often encourage people to identify and amplify those vital few efforts that drive the most meaningful results. Whether one is managing a global corporation, running a local school, organizing personal finances, or planning a conservation strategy, understanding this distribution helps prioritize the inputs that generate the most value, while avoiding the trap of spreading energy too thinly across low-impact areas. In a world of increasing complexity and limited resources, the Pareto Principle remains a timeless guide for strategic thinking. Chapter 2. Myths of the 80-20 Rule. 80-20ths is not always exact. It's a pattern, not a law. It's crucial to understand that the 80-20 rule is not a rigid law, but rather a pattern, a generalization that helps to identify imbalances and optimize efforts. It's not something that will always hold true in every case. And in fact, often the numbers are far from exact. The 80-20 rule's beauty lies in its simplicity, offering a quick way to spot inefficiencies, prioritize tasks, or identify key drivers in a process. For example, in business, it's commonly observed that a small percentage of customers or products might account for the majority of revenue or profit. However, this doesn't mean that in every business, or even in every product line, the ratio will always adhere to the specific 80-20th split. In some cases, it might be closer to 70-30ths or 90-10ths, or even more extreme distributions. The exact figures are less important than the broader insight that a few vital factors tend to have the most significant impact. The essential point is that the 80-20 pattern is a way of recognizing the asymmetry that often exists between causes and effects. It speaks to the nature of many systems where a small portion of elements or inputs have an outsized influence on outcomes, but that influence can vary. In many cases, the principle serves as a guideline for analysis rather than a precise rule to apply mechanically. Understanding this is vital to avoid oversimplification. The 80-20 concept isn't always easy to pinpoint because the relationship between inputs and outputs in complex systems is rarely linear. Many factors, variables, and externalities can alter or obscure the distribution, leading to different outcomes depending on the context or data set. When trying to apply this rule to real-life situations, it often requires a nuanced approach, taking into account the specific dynamics at play. There are instances where the Pareto distribution doesn't hold up at all, especially in systems where efforts are more uniformly distributed or where the relationship between inputs and outputs is more balanced. For example, in a highly collaborative environment, contributions from many individuals might be roughly equal, making the 80-20th split irrelevant. Similarly, In cases of complete market saturation, where every product or service is almost equally demanded, the pattern might not emerge as strongly. The flexibility of the 80-20 rule should be appreciated as well. It offers a perspective, not a hard and fast prediction. The key is to observe trends and patterns that might reveal opportunities for improvement or optimization. In its application, it's about identifying where you can focus your energy for the greatest return, even if the returns don't exactly match the 80-20 distribution. The principle becomes most valuable when used as a framework for thinking critically about where to allocate time, resources, or attention. The rule's broad popularity across different disciplines stems from its ability to provide a mental shortcut for analyzing complex situations. It encourages a focus on the most impactful factors while providing a sense of how inefficiencies might be streamlined. However, there is a danger in mistaking the rule for a universal truth. The precision of the 80-20 split can vary drastically, and expecting it to apply in every case may lead to missed opportunities or misguided decisions. As useful as the principle can be in offering insights into inefficiency and prioritization, it's essential to remember that it doesn't always hold perfectly in every situation. The 80-20 rule is a pattern that provides a lens through which we can view the world, but the exact ratios may fluctuate based on the specific context or dynamics at play. The rule, though often useful, oversimplifies the complexity of real-world systems. When dealing with large organizations, diverse industries, or multifaceted tasks, the relationship between effort and reward is not always as neatly divided as the 80-20 principle suggests. For example, in industries with a highly competitive and saturated market, smaller companies might not follow the 80-20 rule as closely because their efforts are spread across a wider range of products and customers. The influence of a few major clients or products may still exist, but the proportions could look different in practice, or the variation might be less dramatic. The application of the 80-20 rule assumes that the causes are readily identifiable and separable, which isn't always the case. Many factors interact in complex ways that are not easy to isolate. For instance, an employee's performance might be influenced by a range of internal and external factors, such as personal circumstances, team dynamics, and company culture, none of which can be simply reduced to an 80-20 breakdown. The outputs from these factors are likely distributed unevenly, but the exact balance between them doesn't always follow a predictable pattern. Another critical aspect of the 80-20 rule is that it is dynamic. As conditions change, whether through shifts in the market, new technological advancements, or changing customer preferences, the pattern can shift too. What once seemed like a clear-cut case of 80-20 distribution might evolve over time, especially in fast-paced or rapidly changing industries. Companies or individuals who rigidly apply the 80-20 principle without adjusting to new realities may find themselves missing out on emerging opportunities or neglecting important trends that aren't immediately obvious in the data. In some scenarios, the 80-20 rule doesn't even apply at all. For example, in creative endeavors, the production of new ideas or works might be more evenly distributed across time or effort. A writer may produce a large volume of work that doesn't necessarily correlate to just a few breakout pieces. In science or research, discoveries and breakthroughs often emerge unpredictably and don't always follow a neat distribution of effort versus outcome. In these contexts, the focus should be on exploration and iteration rather than the pursuit of efficiency based on the 80-20 framework. The tendency of the 80-20 rule to simplify complex systems into digestible patterns can be both an asset and a limitation. While it provides a useful starting point for analysis, it's important not to get trapped into believing that the rule will always apply exactly as expected. Treating it as an exact science, rather than a guiding principle, can create false expectations and potentially lead to misguided decision-making. For instance, businesses might ignore valuable, yet less visible opportunities because they don't immediately appear to fit into the dominant 80-20 pattern. Applying the rule across different fields or domains also requires awareness of the context. In a software development environment, for example, the 80-20 rule might suggest that a few lines of code or key developers lead to the majority of the project's success. But in creative fields like design or arts, the contributions and value generated might not be as easy to pin down to a small number of individuals or efforts. The flow of ideas in these environments is often more distributed, and the influence of many factors can be harder to quantify. The inherent fluidity of the 80-20 pattern is an important feature to grasp. It functions more as a reminder that in many situations, there is an uneven distribution of effort and reward. Recognizing this imbalance allows individuals and organizations to make informed choices about where to concentrate their efforts for the greatest impact. But the exact proportions should be viewed with flexibility, and there should be an understanding that the specific numbers might vary greatly depending on context, timing, and other influencing factors. Common misapplications and overgeneralizations of the 80-20 rule. One of the most common misapplications of the 80-20 rule is treating it as a mathematical law rather than an observational guideline. The original insight by Vilfredo Pareto related specifically to wealth distribution in Italy, not a universal law of nature. When people assume that the 80-20 split must hold in all scenarios, they may force-fit data to match the rule, ignoring more accurate distributions or subtler dynamics. For example, a company might attempt to identify the top 20% of employees driving 80% of results without considering the complexity of team-based work, collaboration, or contextual factors that dilute individual attribution. Another problematic generalization occurs when people use the 80-20 rule to justify neglect or elimination of the less productive 80%. In business and productivity literature, this has led to recommendations to cut entire segments of customers, services, or staff on the assumption that they contribute minimally to profits or outcomes. However, such decisions often fail to account for interdependencies. The remaining 80% may provide indirect value, stability, or resilience, and removing them can weaken the overall ecosystem. For example, less profitable customers might still be essential for brand reputation, volume discounts, or word-of-mouth referrals. In time management, people often use the rule to suggest that 20% of tasks lead to 80% of results, encouraging an extreme focus on a narrow set of activities. While prioritization is valuable, this interpretation can lead to the dismissal of routine or maintenance tasks that are essential but not immediately impactful. Overemphasizing only the high-impact activities can erode infrastructure, relationships, or long-term goals. For instance, ignoring administrative duties or regular check-ins might not harm productivity in the short term, but can lead to breakdowns or inefficiencies over time. The 80-20 rule is also frequently misapplied in education and personal development, where learners are told to focus only on the 20% of material that yields 80% of test results or performance improvements. This approach may work for short-term gains, such as standardized test prep, but can lead to superficial understanding and weak foundational knowledge. In complex disciplines like medicine, engineering, or law, seemingly less important details can become critical in specific contexts. Cherry-picking only the high-leverage areas often misses the integrative and nuanced nature of true expertise. A further complication arises when people assume that the 20% responsible for 80% of results is always identifiable in advance. In practice, this requires careful data analysis and contextual understanding, which is often lacking. Premature assumptions about what the vital few are can result in chasing false positives or optimizing the wrong variables. Without rigorous validation, businesses may double down on products or strategies they believe to be disproportionately successful, only to discover that success was due to temporary trends, external factors, or even random chance. The 80-20 rule can also lead to overconfidence in quick-fix solutions. In both business and personal contexts, people may believe they can overhaul performance simply by identifying and focusing on a small subset of tasks, clients, or behaviors. This mindset can foster impatience and oversimplification, undermining efforts that require sustained effort, systemic change, or iterative refinement. For example, in organizational change, leaders may try to fix only the top 20% of perceived bottlenecks, neglecting underlying cultural or structural issues that require broader engagement. The 80-20 rule is sometimes conflated with similar sounding but distinct ideas, such as the idea of minimal effort for maximum output. This leads to confusion and misinterpretation. The principle is descriptive, not prescriptive. It tells us what has been observed, not necessarily what should be done. Overextending the rule into areas like relationships, creative work, or ethics, where input-output metrics are harder to define, can result in cynical or utilitarian thinking. Treating people, for instance, as though only a small subset deserve attention or investment because they provide the most return undermines the human and qualitative aspects of leadership and community building. The allure of the 80-20 rule often lies in its seductive promise of efficiency, a compelling narrative in a world increasingly obsessed with optimization. This has led to the principle being championed in popular productivity cultures, entrepreneurship ideologies, and self-help literature. However, in this widespread adoption, the principle is often diluted or distorted beyond its original intent, leading to deeper layers of overgeneralization and conceptual misuse. One such overreach is the belief that the 80-20 dynamic is inherently stable or permanent, that once the critical 20% has been identified, one can confidently and continuously rely on it to deliver results. In reality, systems are dynamic. Markets evolve, customer preferences shift, technologies advance, and human motivations change. What represents the productive 20% today may not hold that status tomorrow. Businesses that anchor too heavily on past Pareto analyses without ongoing reassessment risk becoming outdated or blindsided by new disruptions. This over-reliance assumes a kind of stasis that rarely exists in real-life environments, especially in high-velocity industries. There is also a tendency to misapply the 80-20 rule as a tool for making hierarchical or moral judgments. For example, within organizations, leaders might label employees or departments as part of the valuable 20% or the dispensable 80%, breeding resentment, morale issues, and dysfunctional cultures. While some contributors may indeed have disproportionate impact, the framing becomes harmful when it is used to validate exclusion, ignore context, or underinvest in developmental potential. This misapplication often overlooks the cumulative or supporting roles that many individuals play, roles that may not show up in performance metrics, but are essential to the organization's health. In academic and policy circles, similar oversimplifications can occur. Policymakers may invoke the 80-20 rule when designing interventions, believing that targeting a small group will solve a large portion of a societal issue, whether it's crime, healthcare costs, or educational failure. While there's strategic merit in targeted interventions, this mindset can lead to the neglect of systemic causes, broader inequality, or the nuanced experiences of the remaining 80%. It turns a complex issue into a problem of high-yield targeting, which can end up masking deeper, structural inadequacies. In marketing and sales, businesses often use the 80-20 heuristic to segment customers, emphasizing high-spending clients while de-emphasizing others. While this may improve short-term ROI, it can erode brand equity and limit long-term growth. The less profitable customers might be the early adopters of future trends, or they may represent untapped potential if offered different value propositions. The rule, when misapplied here, fosters short-termism and discourages experimentation or inclusive strategies that accommodate diverse customer needs. Another subtle, yet problematic, interpretation of the 80-20 rule is the assumption that efficiency always correlates with value. In creative and intellectual domains, this is particularly misleading. For instance, in writing, research, or art, the final 20% of refinement may take 80% of the effort, reversing the supposed equation, but that effort often makes the difference between mediocre and outstanding. Treating effort beyond the initial 20% of results as wasteful or unnecessary disregards the craftsmanship and depth that true quality requires. This misunderstanding can degrade standards and contribute to a culture of just good enough. The rule is often abstracted and repackaged into productivity hacks without consideration of human well-being. Popular advice might suggest that if 20% of your friends give you 80% of joy, you should focus only on those few and distance yourself from the rest. Applied mechanically, this logic risks commodifying relationships and reducing human interaction to a cost-benefit analysis. Such thinking, while appealing in its clarity, fails to account for the value of diverse social networks, emotional labor, reciprocity, and the unpredictability of human connection. In software development and project management, the 80-20 rule is sometimes used to argue that most of a product's value can be delivered with only 20% of the features, leading to minimum viable products, MVPs, that are rushed to market. While this can accelerate innovation, it often creates brittle foundations. Technical debt accumulates, edge cases are ignored, and user experience suffers. This interpretation of the rule assumes that the remaining 80% is fluff rather than critical support infrastructure, which can undermine scalability and long-term reliability. The overgeneralization of the 80-20 rule also extends into personal growth and behavior change. Individuals are often told to eliminate most habits or commitments and focus exclusively on the few that provide disproportionate benefit. While this can improve focus, it risks promoting a kind of existential minimalism that strips life of its texture. Not everything we do is, or should be, optimized for productivity or impact. The richness of life often resides in activities with marginal gains, meandering conversations, hobbies, or learning for curiosity's sake. The pursuit of hyper-efficiency can inadvertently drain these subtle sources of meaning. Perhaps one of the most insidious effects of misusing the 80-20 rule is the reinforcement of power imbalances. In organizations or societies where a small elite controls most resources or outcomes, the rule is sometimes presented not as a call to improve equity, but as a justification for inequality. It becomes a rationale for centralizing control, reducing investment in broader inclusion, or celebrating efficiency at the cost of fairness. Used carelessly, it can mutate from an observation about resource distribution into a belief system that accepts, or even valorizes, imbalance. Chapter 3. Applying the 80-20 rule in business and work. In the realm of business, the 80-20 rule often translates to the idea that approximately 20% of customers are responsible for 80% of sales, and similarly, around 20% of products contribute to 80% of profits or revenue. To identify high-leverage customers, companies must first analyze their sales data in detail. This means examining which customers are generating the most revenue, how frequently they purchase, the average order value, and their long-term value over time. Often, businesses find that a small subset of loyal or high-spending customers account for a disproportionately large share of income. These customers might be repeat buyers, have a higher lifetime value, or consistently purchase premium products or services. Recognizing these customers allows a company to segment its audience more intelligently, tailoring marketing, support, and engagement strategies to nurture and retain them. Understanding customer behavior involves more than just looking at purchase volume. Companies should also consider profitability. Some high-revenue customers may demand extensive support or discounts, making them less profitable than others who quietly contribute significant margin without requiring much attention. By analyzing metrics like customer acquisition cost, support burden, return rate, and payment timeliness, businesses can isolate those customers who offer the highest return on investment. These are the truly high-leverage clients, ones that not only bring in consistent business, but do so with efficiency and low overhead. On the product side, applying the 80-20 rule can reveal which offerings are driving the bulk of the business. Typically, a small subset of products will generate the majority of sales or profits. Companies can determine this by analyzing sales frequency, revenue contribution, and profit margins per product. This analysis often reveals that certain products are significantly more popular or profitable than others. These may be flagship products, seasonal bestsellers, or items with strong brand association that drive both direct sales and traffic for cross-selling opportunities. However, identifying high-leverage products isn't just about revenue. Products that have high margins or that lead to customer retention and future sales can also be incredibly valuable. For example, a relatively low-selling product might serve as a gateway, bringing in new customers who later become repeat buyers of higher-margin items. Similarly, a product with a strong upsell or cross-sell potential could be considered high leverage, even if it doesn't top the sales chart. Operational data, such as inventory turnover, return rates, and production costs, must also be considered. A product with high sales volume might not be high leverage if it has high return rates or thin margins. Conversely, a niche product with stable demand and low production cost might offer exceptional returns. Analyzing these aspects helps businesses refine their product portfolio, possibly phasing out low-impact items and reallocating resources toward high-performing lines. In practice, using the 80-20 rule to guide strategic decisions enables more focused marketing, streamlined operations, and smarter inventory management. It allows companies to prioritize where to invest their time, budget, and energy. Marketing campaigns can be optimized to target high-leverage customers with tailored offers or loyalty programs. Product development can focus on enhancing or extending the lines that are already performing well. Sales teams can be guided to prioritize high-impact clients and offerings, increasing overall efficiency. The goal of applying the 80-20 rule is to uncover hidden patterns that inform better business decisions. By concentrating on the few customers and products that matter most, companies can significantly improve profitability, resource allocation, and long-term sustainability. The 80-20 rule is not merely a tool for retrospective analysis. It becomes a guiding framework for proactive strategy and sustained growth. Once high-leverage customers and products are identified, the real power of this insight lies in how the business acts upon it. For customers, segmentation becomes much more precise and effective. High-leverage customers often share certain characteristics, demographics, behaviors, purchase patterns, or even values. Understanding these traits allows businesses to develop more nuanced personas and target similar prospects with refined acquisition strategies. Instead of casting a wide net, marketing can be highly focused, increasing conversion rates while reducing acquisition costs. For existing customers, personalization becomes key. Businesses can create exclusive offers, early access to new products, or VIP experiences that reinforce loyalty and elevate customer lifetime value. The relationship with high-leverage customers should evolve beyond transactions into partnerships. These customers can become brand advocates, beta testers for new products, or sources of insightful feedback. Engaging them in this deeper manner not only strengthens loyalty, but also creates a virtuous cycle where their insights help refine the product or service offering, leading to greater success across a wider customer base. The insights gained from the 80-20 analysis should also inform resource allocation across departments. For instance, customer support teams might prioritize training or specialized assistance for teams dealing with high-value clients. Sales efforts might include dedicated account managers for top-tier customers to ensure their needs are met promptly and efficiently. Similarly, financial and operational planning can prioritize inventory management, procurement, and fulfillment strategies based on the demand for high-leverage products. In terms of products, understanding the few that drive the majority of results leads to a much more disciplined approach to product management. Rather than continuously adding new items in the hope that something might stick, businesses can double down on what's working, developing variants, bundles, or complementary products that increase the revenue potential of already successful offerings. This reduces complexity in the supply chain and increases the ROI of every product-related initiative. The Pareto Principle also encourages pruning. By identifying the 80% of products or customers that contribute minimally to results, or worse, create losses, businesses can make difficult but necessary decisions. This might mean discontinuing underperforming SKUs, stopping marketing campaigns to low-value customer segments, or even parting ways with problematic clients. The result is a leaner, more focused operation that is easier to scale and manage. Innovation efforts can also benefit. By observing how high-leverage products solve problems or delight customers, businesses can identify the core value propositions that resonate most. This can direct our /&D or design efforts toward innovations that are more likely to succeed in the market. Similarly, feedback from top-tier customers about what they love or dislike about the most successful products can guide refinements or entirely new product lines that mirror the same appeal. From a strategic planning perspective, companies that truly embrace the 80-20 rule build business models that favor scalability and resilience. They understand that growth doesn't necessarily mean doing more. It often means doing less, but with greater intensity and precision. Rather than trying to appeal to everyone, They focus on maximizing the value of their best customers and best products, which usually requires fewer resources and results in higher margins and stronger brand loyalty. The 80-20 rule also integrates well with modern analytics and machine learning tools. Advanced customer analytics platforms can help businesses continuously monitor performance and adapt their strategies in real time. What constitutes the top 20% today may shift with market trends, new technologies, or competitor actions. Therefore, applying the 80-20 principle is not a one-time exercise. It becomes a dynamic part of ongoing strategic assessment, supported by data and responsive systems. Culturally, organizations that adopt this mindset cultivate a habit of focus and impact. Employees are trained to ask not just how to grow, but where the greatest leverage exists. Teams prioritize based on contribution to core objectives, and performance is measured not just by activity, but by outcome. This cultural alignment enhances efficiency and clarity across all levels of the business. Identifying high-leverage customers and products using the 80-20 rule is about aligning your business with what matters most. It enables smarter decisions, more impactful strategies, and a business model designed not just for scale, but for sustainable and profitable growth. By focusing on the few inputs that generate the most significant outputs, businesses unlock a powerful edge in an increasingly competitive landscape. Chapter 4. 80-20 in Daily Task Management. Applying the 80-20 rule to your daily tasks begins with awareness. Not all tasks hold equal weight in terms of impact. In any given day, only a few tasks truly drive your goals forward or produce measurable results. These high-impact tasks are what should command the most attention, energy, and time. The challenge lies in distinguishing them from the noise, those routine or low-value tasks that consume time but add little to no value in the grand scheme. To begin this shift, consider how much time is typically spent on checking emails, attending meetings, or handling small administrative tasks. While these activities are often necessary, they rarely contribute significantly to long-term achievements. In contrast, a focused period spent on strategy development, skill building, problem-solving, or creative output tends to have far-reaching effects. By identifying which activities yield the highest returns, you can reorient your schedule to prioritize them and reduce the time spent on tasks that merely fill the day. Daily task management under the 80-20 principle requires regular reflection and adjustment. It's not a one-time filtering process, but rather a continuous evaluation of where your time is going versus where it should be going. This involves asking questions like, which activities today will bring me closer to my key goals? What tasks, if delegated or postponed, would free me up to focus on more critical matters? These reflective questions help create clarity around priorities and enable more purposeful decision-making. One of the most powerful aspects of this principle is how it empowers people to say no. When you understand which 20% of your tasks generate 80% of your outcomes, it becomes easier to set boundaries and avoid overcommitting to low-value work. It allows you to protect your time and energy for the work that matters most. This is especially valuable in environments where multitasking and busyness are often mistaken for productivity. Also, the 80-20 rule can aid in combating burnout. By focusing on fewer, more impactful tasks, individuals can achieve greater results without the need to be constantly busy. This intentional simplification reduces mental clutter and creates space for deeper thinking, creativity, and satisfaction in one's work. It promotes a quality over quantity mindset, encouraging excellence rather than exhaustion. In practice, this principle may lead to restructuring your daily schedule. It might involve starting the day with the most valuable task, the one that will create the most momentum or move the needle the furthest. It could also mean batching similar low-priority tasks into a designated time slot, so they don't interrupt focus or dilute your energy throughout the day. The goal is to create a workflow that supports deep focus on what truly matters, while still handling necessary but less impactful duties in a streamlined manner. Over time, consistently applying the 80-20 rule leads to greater awareness of your strengths and the areas where you create the most value. This self-knowledge is invaluable, both for personal growth and for aligning your work with long-term goals. It transforms daily task management from a reactive checklist into a strategic practice, one that prioritizes results over routine and purpose over busyness. The 80-20 rule is not just a productivity hack. It's a mindset shift that challenges the assumption that all tasks deserve equal treatment. By focusing on the few things that matter most, you unlock the ability to do more with less, make better decisions, and lead a more intentional, fulfilling professional life. The 80-20 rule invites a shift from a reactive to a proactive mode of operating. Many people begin their day by opening their inbox or checking messages, immediately becoming absorbed in the demands of others. This reactive habit often pulls attention away from high-leverage activities and subordinates important tasks to the tyranny of the urgent. When the 80-20 principle is embraced, it encourages deliberate planning, where each day is shaped with intention rather than dictated by external inputs. A useful practice rooted in this principle is identifying your vital few tasks the evening before or the start of each day. These are not necessarily the easiest or most urgent tasks, but the ones most aligned with your key objectives. They often require more concentration and effort, which is why they are easy to postpone. However, dedicating your peak energy periods, usually in the morning for most people, to these vital tasks ensures you're maximizing your output and creating momentum early in the day. The 80-20 rule also intersects with the idea of leverage. High-impact tasks typically possess leverage. They either solve multiple problems at once, open doors to future opportunities, or free up time and resources down the line. For example, automating a recurring process may take an hour today, but save you dozens of hours over the year. Similarly, preparing thoroughly for an important presentation or negotiation could influence the direction of a project or client relationship. These are the types of actions that deserve priority because their ripple effects are disproportionately large. When examined through the lens of roles and responsibilities, the 80-20 rule can clarify where to focus your unique talents. Each person brings a particular skill set and perspective to their work. Identifying the activities where you provide the greatest value and delegating or minimizing the rest frees you to contribute at your highest level. This principle is not about doing less for the sake of being lazy. It's about doing less of the trivial to do more of the essential. Over time, this approach can lead to dramatic improvements not only in productivity, but also in job satisfaction. There's a certain fulfillment that comes from working within your zone of impact, where your efforts are both meaningful and effective. It reduces the frustration that comes from spending a full day feeling busy, but not truly accomplished. This is because, when applied properly, the 80-20 rule brings clarity, not just about what to do, but about why you're doing it. It's also important to understand that the ratio is not fixed. While the 80-20 split is symbolic, in reality, it could be 90/10ths, 70/30ths, or even more skewed depending on the situation. The key is not the exact numbers, but the recognition that inequality exists in effort versus result. Constantly revisiting your tasks, goals, and outcomes helps you refine your focus. What was a high-impact activity last month may not be the same today, especially in fast-paced environments. Regular self-review and adaptability ensure that you continue to align with your most productive work. The 80-20 principle also proves valuable in managing distractions. When you're aware that only a few tasks truly matter, it becomes easier to identify which interruptions or habits are stealing time without offering real value. You become more mindful of where attention is leaking, and you gain the discipline to eliminate or reduce those leaks. This might mean limiting social media, declining unnecessary meetings, or creating systems that protect your focus. The result is a cleaner, more intentional workflow that supports sustained progress. Embracing the 80-20 mindset ultimately leads to a deeper sense of control. Rather than feeling overwhelmed by an endless to-do list, you begin to see patterns. What matters, what doesn't, and what can be cut. You learn to trust that doing fewer things better often leads to better results than doing more things in a scattered or shallow way. In the long run, this principle fosters mastery. By consistently giving your best time and energy to the most impactful activities, you not only get more done, you get better at the things that count. This compounding effect builds confidence, deepens expertise, and positions you for greater opportunities. The 80-20 rule is not about shortcuts. It's about strategy. It's not a rejection of hard work, but a redirection of effort toward what truly counts. In a world of constant demands and distractions, it is a powerful framework for reclaiming your time, refining your focus, and living each day with greater intention and impact. Chapter 5. Applying 80-20ths to hobbies and side projects. Applying the 80-20 principle to hobbies and side projects can transform the way you invest your time, energy, and creativity. At its core, the 80-20 principle suggests that roughly 80% of outcomes come from 20% of efforts. In the context of hobbies and side projects, this concept encourages a thoughtful examination of which activities bring the most satisfaction, results, or progress, and which are consuming time without offering proportional rewards. When you apply the 80-20 lens to your creative or personal endeavors, you begin by identifying what truly brings you the most joy or value. For example, if you're into photography, you might realize that 20% of the time you spend, perhaps when you're shooting in a particular setting or editing in a specific style, results in 80% of your favorite or most successful photos. Recognizing this allows you to double down on the kinds of shoots or editing techniques that matter most to you, while minimizing or even eliminating less rewarding aspects. This doesn't mean you have to rigidly ignore the other 80%, but by being aware of where the greatest returns lie, you can shift your attention in a way that keeps you more energized and fulfilled. For side projects, particularly those that might have aspirations of becoming something more, like a business or a career transition, applying the 80-20 rule becomes even more crucial. If you're running a blog, developing an app, or crafting handmade products, you'll likely find that a small set of actions, publishing certain types of posts, engaging with specific audiences, or showcasing your products in the right places, drive the majority of your traffic, engagement, or sales. Instead of chasing every possible avenue for growth or trying to perfect every single element, focus on the small set of actions that are already working. This not only saves time, but also helps maintain momentum, which is often one of the hardest things to preserve in self-motivated projects. A powerful outcome of applying the 80-20 principle is the ability to avoid burnout. Many hobbyists and side project creators feel overwhelmed because they believe they must do it all. The 80-20 mindset flips this on its head. You begin to ask, what are the few things I can do that will make the biggest difference? Rather than spreading yourself thin across dozens of tasks, many of which may have minimal impact, you start prioritizing high-leverage actions. This keeps your passion alive and your progress visible. The principle also helps with decision fatigue, which often creeps into passion projects when you're juggling them alongside full-time jobs, families, and other commitments. By narrowing your focus to the critical few rather than the trivial many, you're able to make faster, more confident decisions. This mental clarity can fuel a more sustainable creative rhythm and protect the joy that drew you to your hobby or side project in the first place. There's also a liberating simplicity in realizing that not everything needs to be pursued. In a world that glorifies hustle and constant optimization, the 80-20 approach invites you to do less but better. It gives you permission to cut features from your app that no one uses, to stop chasing social media platforms that bring negligible traffic, or to discontinue projects that no longer align with your values, even if they were once exciting. This creates space to reinvest in what's truly worthwhile. Reflection is key when applying the 80-20 rule. Periodically stepping back to ask what's working and what's not can sharpen your instincts and help you become more intuitive about where to invest your time next. Over time, this practice builds a kind of creative intelligence, a deep understanding of your own patterns of motivation, output, and reward. Whether your goal is mastery, monetization, or simply personal fulfillment, the 80-20 principle is a compass that can guide you to greater impact with less friction. Chapter 6. Applying 80-20ths to relationships. Applying the 80-20 principle to relationships is a powerful framework for improving the quality and depth of personal connections. At its core, the principle states that roughly 80% of outcomes come from 20% of efforts or inputs. In the context of relationships, this translates to the idea that a small percentage of actions, behaviors, or dynamics account for the majority of the relationship's value, happiness, or issues. One of the most effective ways to apply this principle is by identifying the 20% of behaviors, conversations, or shared experiences that lead to 80% of the emotional satisfaction and connection. In close relationships, whether romantic, familial, or friendships, certain interactions hold far more emotional weight than others. A single heartfelt conversation, an act of kindness, or a spontaneous shared laugh can often strengthen a bond more than dozens of casual, surface-level encounters. Recognizing what those high-impact moments look like and intentionally creating space for them can lead to much richer, more fulfilling relationships. In romantic relationships, for example, small gestures, like expressing genuine appreciation, actively listening, or showing up during difficult moments, often matter more than grand displays of affection. Partners who can identify the small but meaningful actions that make the other person feel seen and valued will often find that these contribute disproportionately to their overall happiness together. Similarly, resolving the key 20% of issues that cause 80% of arguments or dissatisfaction can dramatically improve harmony. If communication style or unmet emotional needs are core problems, addressing those specific areas rather than trying to fix every small disagreement can lead to a more peaceful and loving relationship. This rule also helps in filtering which relationships deserve the most attention and energy. Not every relationship in your life will be equally important or beneficial. Often, a small circle of meaningful, supportive connections contributes most significantly to emotional well-being, while a larger number of shallow or draining relationships might offer little value. Applying the 80-20 principle means being mindful about who you invest your time and energy into, prioritizing the relationships that nourish you and letting go, or at least stepping back, from those that consistently take more than they give. This doesn't mean using people transactionally, but rather understanding your limits and focusing on reciprocal, life-affirming interactions. On the other side, it's equally valuable to reflect on whether you are part of the 20% in someone else's life who adds meaning, support, and joy. Being a high-impact friend, partner, or family member involves being present, consistent, and emotionally intelligent. It involves showing up in moments that matter and offering something deeper than just presence, a sense of real understanding, support, and mutual growth. In workplaces or professional networks, where relationships still play a key role, applying the 80-20 principle can help identify mentors, colleagues, or collaborators whose influence or guidance disproportionately boosts your growth or opportunities. Rather than trying to network with everyone or maintain superficial ties with many people, you might benefit more from deepening a few strategic, authentic connections. Applying 80-20 to relationships is not about reducing human interaction to a formula, but about becoming aware of patterns. What matters most? Who brings the most meaning? When are you most connected? Which habits deepen love or trust? And which consistently cause friction? This kind of analysis, done with compassion and mindfulness, can help you refine your approach to relationships so that they're not only more fulfilling, but also more sustainable and resilient. This mindset encourages intentionality. Relationships, like anything of value, require effort, but not all effort is equal. The key lies in discerning which actions, conversations, and connections generate the greatest emotional return, and in giving those your focus, time, and heart. Relationships are complex, living systems that evolve over time, and often we find ourselves entangled in habitual patterns, some nourishing, some draining. The Pareto Principle provides a lens through which we can evaluate these patterns and make intentional choices about where to direct our relational efforts for the greatest impact. One powerful application of this principle is in the area of communication. In most relationships, only a small fraction of conversations account for the majority of connection or conflict. It's not about how much we talk, but what we talk about and how we do it. Vulnerable, honest, and attuned communication often holds disproportionate value. A short but meaningful exchange can do more to build trust than hours of logistical talk or small talk. Likewise, certain recurring communication habits, like defensiveness, blame, or avoidance, may be responsible for a large portion of the emotional disconnect between people. Identifying and shifting Just those few critical patterns can transform the dynamic significantly. This principle also reveals itself in time spent together. Many people assume that quantity of time equals quality, but this is often not the case. A weekend spent distracted or disengaged may do less for a relationship than 30 minutes of fully present, undivided attention. The 20% of time in which both people are truly attuned, open, and emotionally available often makes up the most memorable and meaningful moments. That's where bonds are deepened, trust is rebuilt, and emotional intimacy is created. Applying the 80-20 rule in this way encourages us to prioritize presence over performance, focusing less on how much time we spend and more on the quality of our presence during that time. The Pareto Principle can also help illuminate emotional labor imbalances. In some relationships, one person may be doing the majority of the emotional lifting, checking in, maintaining contact, resolving conflict, while the other coasts on that effort. In the long run, this imbalance breeds resentment and fatigue. Looking at which actions contribute to the emotional health of the relationship and who is carrying those actions can help redistribute that labor more equitably. If one partner is consistently part of the 20% that sustains the relationship while the other is less engaged, it's worth having a conversation about mutual effort and responsibility. In friendships, this principle allows us to gently assess which connections are life-giving and which are chronically one-sided or draining. Not every relationship needs to be deep or intense, but when someone consistently leaves you feeling depleted, unappreciated, or unseen, it might be worth asking whether they belong in your inner circle. Conversely, a handful of friends, perhaps only 20% of your social circle, likely provide most of your sense of belonging, encouragement, and personal growth. Investing more intentionally in these friendships can enhance your social well-being more than spreading yourself thin across dozens of casual acquaintances. Another subtle way the 80-20 principle manifests is in emotional triggers and patterns. In many relationships, especially long-term ones, a few core issues tend to surface again and again, causing the bulk of tension or distance. Instead of attempting to overhaul every possible area of disagreement, couples or close friends can benefit more from identifying and working through that small set of recurring triggers. Often, these stem from unresolved wounds, mismatched needs, or communication breakdowns. Resolving those underlying 20% of issues may eliminate the bulk of emotional turbulence. It's also useful to apply this principle inwardly. Reflect on which of your own behaviors contribute most to your relational success or strain. Maybe 20% of your relational habits, such as how you handle stress, how you respond to conflict, or how you show appreciation, are shaping most of your experiences with others. Self-awareness here becomes a powerful tool, allowing you to amplify the traits and habits that make you a better partner, friend, or family member, while minimizing those that create friction. In long-standing relationships, we often accumulate habits and routines that may no longer serve their original purpose. A handful of well-loved, meaningful rituals, a weekly check-in, an annual getaway, or a simple shared morning routine can offer more connection than dozens of passive, repetitive, or obligatory routines. Choosing to invest energy in the traditions that bring joy, connection, and a sense of shared meaning helps to nourish the relational foundation in a lasting way. Applying the 80-20 principle to relationships isn't about calculating love or reducing people to inputs and outputs. It's about clarity. It's about realizing that not all moments, efforts, or connections are equal, and that by tuning into what truly matters, we can bring more presence, effectiveness, and joy into our relationships. It's about loving smarter, showing up more fully in the moments that matter most, and cultivating connection with intention rather than habit. Conclusion. Throughout this book, we've seen how the 80-20 rule reveals itself in economics, management, time management, relationships, and beyond. It urges us to stop treating all tasks, customers, problems, or opportunities as if they were equal. By identifying and focusing on the most productive inputs, the 20% that yields 80% of the outcome, we learn not only to optimize results but also to simplify complexity. This principle allows us to work smarter rather than harder, to do more with less, and to uncover the hidden leverage in every situation. More importantly, the 80-20 principle offers a path toward greater meaning and fulfillment. In a world saturated with options, distractions, and obligations, it becomes easy to be overwhelmed, to confuse busyness with effectiveness, and to mistake effort for achievement. The principle reminds us that not everything matters equally, and that discernment, knowing what to ignore and what to prioritize, is a rare but vital skill. Applying this principle with intention can free up time, space, and mental energy, giving us the opportunity to invest more deeply in what truly matters, both professionally and personally. The power of the 80-20 principle lies not only in its analytical rigor, but in its capacity to shift mindsets. It invites us to rethink fairness, to challenge assumptions, and to develop a kind of strategic minimalism, doing fewer things but doing them better. Rather than dispersing our efforts across countless demands, we become more selective, more deliberate, and ultimately more impactful. This doesn't mean abandoning ambition or settling for less. It means amplifying the impact of our best ideas, talents, and actions. Let the 80-20 principle guide you not only as a strategy, but as a philosophy. Use it to craft a life and work that are not merely full, but rich with purpose and effectiveness. Recognize the few things that make the biggest difference, and give them the time, energy, and attention they deserve. When applied with wisdom and clarity, the 80-20 principle is not just a tool for efficiency. It is a compass for living a more intentional, empowered, and extraordinary life.